Number 6 and 7 would also be on part 1 of your test because I'm specifically saying to use the quadratic formula to solve. Now, you do need to have the quadratic formula memorized. I'm not going to give it to you. You need to know that this is the quadratic formula. You are at Honors Algebra 2. You should be able to memorize that. So let's put our information into the quadratic formula. We need to know our A, B, and C. Remember, our letters go alphabetically through the quadratic. And when I put things into the quadratic formula, there should not be any x other than the very first one that's saying x equals. I take the opposite of b. Now, b is negative 6, so its opposite is positive 6, plus or minus the square root of. So I take b squared. Now, when b is negative, I put it in parentheses, minus 4, a, c. And that's all going to go over 2 times a. Now, here's where your calculator is helpful. Remember, you are only going to put this radicand, or we call it for the quadratic formula, the discriminant, into your calculator, not my calculator. So let's type that discriminant into the calculator. So you're going to take negative 6 in parentheses squared minus 4 times 4 times 3. And you get negative 12. So put negative 12 here, and then over 2 times 4 is 8. Now you should look at that and say, okay, I have to simplify the square root of negative 12. On this problem, yes, the 6 over 8, both are even, and you can simplify them, but don't do it yet. You have to simplify this square root before going on. So I'll do it off to the side here. You have to know how to simplify the square root of negative 12. The biggest, you're going to have an I, because there's a negative under the radical, and you should know that radical 12 is radical 4 times radical 3. That simplifies to be 2i radical 3. So I'm going to replace what's in the box there, and write this as x equals 6 plus or minus 2i radical 3 all over 8. Now that I have simplified the radical, now I am able to simplify all of these numbers and coefficients. So since 6, 2, and 8 are all even and all multiples of 2, I can divide each of them by 2 and get 3 plus or minus 1i radical 3 over 4. So you should know how to simplify those square roots. Okay, if you need help simplifying, ask your teacher. If you at least got to this point, you're doing okay. If you got to this point, you're doing even better. This is the goal. Okay? But if you can at least get to the first part and get negative 12, then you're on the right track. Number 7, in order to use the quadratic formula, your quadratic has to be set equal to 0. So the first thing I have to do is subtract the 8 from both sides and subtract the 2x from the left-hand side. So I'd have 3x squared. Now if I subtract 2x here, I'll have plus 5x and then minus 8. Make sure your signs are correct. And then you're going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula again. You need to know your A, B, and C. Before I go on, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. This quadratic could not be factored because there's an I and a radical in it. I just thought of that and I wanted to make sure to say that. All right, quadratic formula. X equals, I'm going to take the opposite of B, so this is going to be negative 5 plus or minus. Now here I have B squared in parentheses minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay. So let's simplify. Let's put our discriminant into our calculator to fill in under the radical. So we will have 5 squared minus 4AC. And you get 121. Now you should hopefully remember and recognize that 121 is a perfect square. So what you can do is simplify that to be negative 5 plus or minus 11 over 6. Now, here's where this problem is different from the previous, and we've talked about this in class. In the previous problem, number 6, I had an I and a radical in this answer. So I said go ahead in class and leave that plus or minus in your answer. Don't write it out twice, just leave it like that in that condensed exact form. You can do that when you have I in radical. I don't have an I or a radical over here. So what I need to do is tell me the exact two rational numbers that equals. So what we did was we split it up. We had to figure out what negative 5 plus 11 over 6 equal, and what negative 5 minus 11 over 6 equal. This is the only time you have to split it up, is when there's no radical and no I. Well, negative 5 plus 11 over 6 is 6 over 6, which is 1. And negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16 over 6, which is negative 8 thirds. Those are two rational answers, so you could have factored the original problem. Oh, wrong button.